Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to explain why conservatives cannot defend capitalism. Um, you can probably see this pretty clearly with a lot of the shifts with the Groypers and the Nationalists and the Republican Party starting to take over. But this is something that Rand predicted since she was alive. Rand predicted this when she was alive because it's because of the altruistic morality that's held by the conservatives. The conservatives view capitalism as the most pragmatic thing without defining what the good is. In fact, they define the good as something that capitalism is explicitly opposed to, altruism. Capitalism is about you achieving for yourself, you achieving things that are in your own best interest, using your own mind. And when you hold capitalism as this sort of utilitarian idea that the conservatives tend to hold it as, they ultimately have to abandon it because the issue with utilitarianism is that they don't define what it means for something to be good. They don't define the good. They just say what is good for the greatest amount of people. Well, what is good? What does it mean to be good for the greatest number of people? So then it leads them to these sort of altruistic sort of things where, we'll just use force a little bit here to steer the market a little bit to make sure that this bad thing doesn't happen to the group. And they basically try to steer capitalism to make it into something that is better for the group. And this is ultimately why conservatives cannot fully accept capitalism. They're altruists. They're religious people. They're people who view the nation as primary. And obviously this is going to lead them down the road of nationalism because ultimately they view protecting the interests of our people, of our nation, as this primary sort of function of government. And that's why they defended capitalism in the past. They said, this is what's in the best interest of our people, of our nation. And that leads them to this sort of this mixed economy capitalist system that they tend to advocate for today. However, when someone like a liberal or a Democrat comes in, or socialist, I guess, comes in and says that, no, we're going to create this economy that works for all of us, that puts all of us in this together and sort of distributes wealth to everybody, then they have the moral high ground. Conservatives always have to argue from the whole idea that it's moral, but it's not practical. They argue from that whole idea, and that essentially leads them to ceding the moral high ground to every single liberal who comes up with a new policy. This is why conservatives have lost every single issue that they've tried to defend for the past couple of years. And now I guess they're being a lot more consistent because they're moving towards nationalism. They're moving towards the idea that we need to put the nation first. And the economy, keeping the economy free doesn't really matter. I mean, you see that in my recent discussion with Patrick Casey. He's not very concerned about keeping the market free. He thinks that we should keep in mind the American worker, and if a business does something that affects the American worker in a sort of negative way, well, then we need to violate the business owner's rights. I mean, that's what happens when you have that sort of moral standard, when you have the moral standard of the nation as the primary thing, the primary moral entity. So then you have to basically cede to the socialists at every single economic issue, because the socialists are concerned primarily with altruism, concerned with the good of the workers, the good of the people of the country. And they are explicitly opposed to individual rights. They're explicitly opposed to capitalism. And the conservatives, on the other hand, they simply don't defend it. They don't defend the morality of capitalism. They defend it on pragmatic grounds, which are extremely weak, because pragmatism divorced from morality is extremely destructive. It leads you to not actually understanding what the good is, and it leads you to, the issue with pragmatism is that it doesn't have a sort of moral standard to base the idea of what works on. It doesn't have that. So basically, whatever moral standard is given to them, which is altruism at this point, it becomes the moral standard of what works. Well, if altruism is that standard, then socialism is the proper ideology. This actually goes into a sort of an argument that a lot of conservatives make that I've always found to be really weak, and I always feel like there needs to be more to the argument because it just doesn't seem complete. It's this idea that a lot of conservatives base the idea that socialism doesn't work on human nature. They think humans are too evil to be able to accept socialism fully. Socialism would be this great utopia, of course, but humans are just immoral and they can't accept that. Well, I mean, that is such a low view of humanity, and it basically leads to the whole idea of, oh, what if people could do that? What if people could do that? So shouldn't we strive towards that? Shouldn't that be what we strive towards? And it leads to them sort of abandoning capitalism. So then, essentially, this is why conservatives cannot defend capitalism. This is why we're seeing today that there's no real individualists left. All the conservatives that we thought were good have converted more and more towards nationalism, or they all accept this sort of mixed economy system because they're fundamentally pragmatists. Because, I mean, the issue is, like, they can have these sort of concrete positions at the moment. They can have these sort of concrete positions of capitalism at the moment, but what their method of thinking implies in the long run is that they're going to advocate for centrism, for a mixed economy, because they're pragmatists. Now, the socialists, on the other hand, are going to, in the long run, advocate for pure socialism. They're going to advocate for, or the Democrats, who are perfectly fine with government coming in and basically steering the economy to be more altruistic. They're going to be, over time, if they follow their principles, every time a new issue sort of arises, they're going to choose the socialist end of that. And over time, we'll head more and more towards socialism, because conservatives are just going to defend the mixed economy status quo, while these Democrats are going to have this bold new vision of change, and people are generally going to get behind that because people realize that the status quo is not good right now. The world is not perfect right now, and they think that the only people offering changes is the liberals, the Democrats, and it's all towards statism. It's all towards socialism. So what the conservatives seem to be doing now is moving away from this pragmatic defense of capitalism towards the Trumpian and the America First and the Groyper end of the party. And this actually is a moral principle that they can get behind, but it's just as bad as the left. It's just as bad as communism. Basically, fascism and communism are two sides of the same coin. They're obviously on different ends of the spectrum, quote unquote, although the current spectrum's really stupid and doesn't really identify anything essential. Honestly, the more I think about it, I like the sort of like triangular political spectrum with individualism, communism, and fascism, but that's a whole nother topic. So yeah, essentially these conservatives, they lean towards the more nationalistic side because that gives them like a moral principle to get behind. And when they start doing that, I mean, that's when they're going to start to win. That's when they're going to start to get things done. That's when they're going to start to change the culture, because they're actually getting behind their morality. They're getting behind an altruistic morality. I mean, would be just as bad as communism. Fascism and communism are just as bad. Nationalism and socialism are just as bad, because in both instances, capitalism is abandoned and individual rights are denied. So, I mean, we need to accept an egoistic morality. We need to accept the idea that an individual's only moral duty is to himself, to his own life. He doesn't have some moral duty that needs to be forced by government to other people. Because, I mean, yeah, when you say that an individual has a moral duty to a collective, you're implying that the government should come in and enforce that, because people will, if you let them use their own mind, they're going to act in their self-interest. If you let them use reason, they're going to act in their self-interest, which isn't moral. It's going to lead to them benefiting themselves and not helping everyone else. So this means that, we need the government to come in. And this is why this is why when we have an altruistic sort of morality that everybody agrees with, basically, this is why we see the two ends of the spectrum being communism and fascism. Neither side is individualistic. Neither side believes in egoism. Both sides are altruistic. And it's kind of horseshoe theory, but kind of not. I think there's definitely differences between communism and fascism, but they're both really bad. I'm not a fan of either one. But yeah, ultimately, conservatives need to accept selfishness as a virtue if they want to be able to defend capitalism properly. And I think that's all I have to say for today. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Peace.